Is this okay? That's nice. माइक फिरून
Sir. Hello. Kapil sir.
हाँ बोलिए ना.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I joined this meeting using the recent link you
Yeah,
shared.
the recent link. Yeah.
Yes.
That I had posted yesterday. Na, that was invalid. That got invalid today.
Yes, that's what. Okay. Okay then. You just.
Yeah. About 5 minutes more. Wait for 5. We'll start around 9:35.
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Fine, thank you. What about you?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah.
शेखर, आपके पास प्रांतिक सर का नंबर है क्या? नहीं है. नहीं. मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ, मेरे इसमें ये 2 नाम है, प्रांतिक सर और वंदना पाठक, है ना. इन दोनों को मैडम का काम हो गया तो मेरे मोबाइल से इन दोनों को जूम का लिंक भेज देना.
Good morning, madam.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Do you hear me?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. I'm just putting out my.
Voice is breaking. The voice is breaking. The quality.
My voice. Govind?
No, not your voice. In general, no. We can see there is some discrepancies in the clarity of the voice. It's not that clear. It seems as if someone is traveling and he or she might have opened this webinar and someone is traveling, I think.
So, सगळे आले. Did you call it? Yes, YouTube वर लाईव्ह गेलो आता.
सर आवाज येतोय माझा?
हा मॅडम येत आहे.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Barude sir, we can start.
Okay. Okay, let us start. A very warm and heartfelt good morning to one and all. I'm Dr. Somnath Barude, Assistant Professor and Anchor Host for this inaugural session of 2 days national webinar on depiction of India in English literature. Our Chief Patron, Dr. Dhanraj Mane, Director, Higher Education, Government of Maharashtra, Pune. Our patrons, Honorable Rajendra Ji Mulak, Secretary, BCYRC and BMCT. Honorable Kishore Umate, Secretary, Satimata Shikshan Sanstha, Nagpur. Honorable Professor Rajkumar Keval Ramani, President, Sindhu Navyog Mandal, Nagpur. Honorable Director of Vasantrao Naik, Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, and President of this inaugural session, Dr. Sujata Vyas Madam. Chief guest and inaugurator of this 2 days national webinar, Dr. Urmila Dabir, Principal, Rajkumar Keval Ramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, and Chairperson, Board of Studies in English, Rashtra Sant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. Conveners, Honorable Dr. D.V. Naik, Principal, M.K. Umate College, Nagpur. Dr. Joby George, Principal, Bhivapur Mahavidyalaya, Bhivapur. Dr. Kapil Singhel, Head of the Department of English, Vasantrao Naik, Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur. Organizing Secretaries, Dr. Vaishali Meshram, Dr. Vinita Vigandam, Dr. Harish Tapriya, Mr. Govind Rathod, Mr. Sekhar Vishpute, and members of the organizing committee, Dr. Madhavi Moril, Dr. Sami Naeem, and Mr. Someshwar Wasekar. Technical staff and you, dear all, esteemed participants. I take this opportunity and welcome you all on behalf of the organizers in this session. Dear friends, humans and humanity at large is passing through a severe test of crisis caused by an unseen coronavirus. Normalcy and peace have been taken over by the atmosphere of suspicion, fear, and worries all over the world. At present, we need to believe in ourselves, as a famous quote reads, "Believe you can, and you are halfway there." For sure, soon we shall come out of the atmosphere of horror created due to COVID-19, reciting, narrating, appreciating, analyzing, and criticizing our experiences through new works of literature. We can't change the direction of the wind, but for sure, we can adjust our sails always to reach our destination. With this positive spirit, let us begin this academic feast today. To begin with the introductory remarks, I request the convener and head of the Department of English, the true spearhead behind this 2 days national webinar, Dr. Kapil Singhel. Over to you, Dr. Kapil Singhel, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Barude. Very good morning to one and all present here, and thank you all for joining us today on this 2-day national webinar, Depiction of India in English Literature. This is the second conference in the consecutive year which is being organized by the Department of English at Vasantrao Naik Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur, and being completely conducted on the digital platforms due to COVID-19 pandemic. We are proud to announce that that this webinar is being organized in collaboration with the departments of English at Rajkumar Keval Ramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Jaripatka, Nagpur, Dr. M.K. Umathe College of Arts and Commerce, Nagpur, and Bhivapur Mahavidyalaya, Bhivapur, who have consistently been ranked among the leading teaching institutes of this region. There will be 4 plenary sessions: India in Anglo-Indian literature, India in Indian writing in English, India in diaspora writings, and India in translation writings in English. These sessions will be graced by the 8 esteemed guests from English fraternity who will be joining us from 5 different states, from 5 different states of India. We have the guests from Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Uttar Pradesh to share their knowledge and rich experience. It will be a pleasure to introduce these eminent personalities in the sessions that they would be participating in the capacity of resource persons and chairperson. As the title suggests, this conference has a theme of depiction of India in the literature right from the time when Anglo-Indian writing was prominent to the present time when diaspora and translation writings have gained importance. The Indian writing is divided into pre-independence and post-independence periods. It has been the important guiding force for all these creations relevant to India. About more than 130 participants have registered from 10 different states of India for this webinar, and we have received more than 100 research papers that would be published in peer-reviewed journal, which is having impressive impact factor for the year 2021 and with ISSN. I wish everyone a successful and fruitful conference and hope that each one of you will be benefited in one way or the other by this 2-day webinar. Thank you. Thank you all for participating, and I hand over the mic back to Dr. Barure. Takli? Takli?
I take over, sir. I think it's not there.
Sorry. We have amongst us chief guest of this session, Dr. Urmila Dabir, Principal, Rajkumar Kevalramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, and Chairperson, Board of Studies in English, Rashtrasant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. Madam has been for over 30 years in teaching profession. For last 14 years, she is ably shouldering the responsibility of principal of this present institution. With this administrative work, 10 of her research students have been awarded PhD degree by Rashtrasant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. With more than 10 books and 40 articles published in her name, she has kept herself updated in almost all fields of her subject in the academy. With this, she has also extended her expertise to various institutions of higher learning in multiple capacities like Senate member, Management Council member, Standing Committee member of Rashtrasant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University. She has been NAC accessor, RRC member, and many other committees of the universities and the governments. For her contribution in this field, she has been honored with Dr. Krishna Kumar Gold Medal for Best Principal by Rashtrasant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur in the year 2019. A Best Teacher Award of Rashtrasant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University in 2013 has been awarded to her, and Education Excellence Award by Indo-Thai Forum for educational contribution in the year 2011 are a few of them. So we have amongst us today an eminent scholar and academician. I request Madam Urmila Dabir to inaugurate this national webinar formally and enlighten us all on this occasion. Over to you, Dr. Urmila Dabir.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Chief Patron, Dr. Dhanraj Mane, Director of Higher Education, Maharashtra State, Patrons, Honorable Dr. Maharaj Patil, Honorable Rajendra Mulak, Honorable Kishore Umate, Honorable Shri Vijay Kevalramani, all the esteemed resource persons, conveners, Principal Naik, Principal George, Dr. Kapil Singhal, Dr. Barure, Organizing Secretaries Dr. Meshram, Dr. Vinita, Dr. Tapadia, Mr. Rathod, Mr. Vispute, Organizing Committee, Dr. Madhvi Moril, Dr. Naeem, Dr. Varekar, and all the dear participants. A very good morning to all of you. On behalf of all the collaborating colleges, it is my proud privilege to welcome you all this morning for the two-day national webinar on depiction of India in English literature. COVID-19 has affected the entire teaching learning process for more than a year now, and webinars have become an integral part of our academic endeavors. This collaborative venture has brought a galaxy of learned resource persons on one platform from different parts of the country, and their presentations will throw light on the topic of the webinar. The key person behind this successful event is Dr. Kapil Singhal and his entire team, who has worked hard for all the arrangements. I really appreciate their efforts. Today's topic of the webinar is very important, as many Indian writers have emerged on the academic forefront with their valuable contributions to literature. During the British Empire, the same deep relationship existed between Britain and India. This unique relationship found expression in a large body of English literature, so large as to constitute a genre, Anglo-Indian literature, meaning British who write about India. Whatever the theme or setting, most novels about British India deal ultimately with relationships and Indians. In contact with the British, large number of Indians started living or using English language as a medium of creative exploration and expression of their experiences of life. It was after independence, the Indian writers in English have retained the momentum, and the theme of backwardness, terrible poverty, exploitation, and corruption in the system was honestly exposed. A large portion of early exponents of English literature in India were anyway British. Rabindranath Tagore, Aurobindo Ghosh, Sarojini Naidu contributed significantly to the historical development of English literature in India. In later years, as globalization gained momentum, the new class of Indians, well educated and professionally qualified, emerged. They settled beyond the borders and contributed to Indian writing under the banner diaspora. Indian diaspora fiction in English must be viewed as a subgenre of Indian English diaspora written by diaspora writers. The novel of exile, immigrant fiction, is its substructure with its own unmistakable characteristics. It is the literary result of the Indian experience with the individuals of their host land, their involvement in the nation of their goal. Diasporic literature is a tremendous idea and an umbrella term that incorporate into everything one of those literary works written by writers outside their native nation. Diasporic literature has its roots in the feeling of misfortune and alienation, which develop because of migration and exile. Therefore, the themes of the diasporic writings are homeland, dislocation, displacement, a feeling of loss, alienation and cultural identity, and ethnicity. English language unites the nation more than any of the regional languages, and publishing translation in English of English language became impeccable. In a multilingual society like India, translation is important because it is a form of promoting national understanding of the different regional selves in the country. The aim of this event is to throw light on depiction of India in all its aspects, modern and traditional, thoughtful actions and emotional reactions, politics and economics, and every diversity that unites this nation in the four forms of English literature. I'm sure the erudite resource persons will enlighten further on the topics and deliberations will be fruitful. I wish the webinar a grand success and declare this webinar as inaugurated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam, for setting a tone of India-centric discourse this early morning with the inauguration formally of 2 days national webinar on depiction of India in English literature. Thank you for your insightful words once again. Dear all, we could organize this event within a very short span of time because of the support and motivation of our Honorable Director, Dr. Sujata Vyas Madam. She has been associated with this institute for last 37 years through the Department of Music. Madam is the disciple of famous Gwalior Gharana in Indian classical music. Till date, 9 students have been awarded PhD degree under her able supervision. She has been a regular artist on All India Radio. She had been invited as resource person in refresher and orientation programs of Nagpur University. Today, Madam is amongst us, taking responsibility of the president of this inaugural session. I request Dr. Sujata Vyas for the presidential address on occasion of this inaugural session of the 2 days national webinar. Over to you, Dr. Sujata Vyas, Madam.
Firstly, thank you, our chief guest, Dr. Dabir Madam, for those beautiful and thoughtful words. I hope everyone is keeping safe in these troubled times. I welcome everyone present here to the 2-day national webinar on depiction of India in English literature. The noted author Mark Twain said, India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most artistic materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only. The words of this great English writer cannot be more correct. Since the very beginning, India has been known for its culture, art, and traditions, and is widely mentioned in much of the literature around the world. This includes the author I mentioned above and many more that followed his footsteps later. Not only has the English literature been a mode of presenting India's heritage to the world, but also has been a constant medium to voice the realities of everything that this country goes through. It began at a time when British people had begun to rule parts of India. The first English newspaper in India, Hickey's Bengal Gazette, was established by James Augustus Hickey. The paper was widely known for its provocative, sarcastic style of writing towards many social injustices that were brought by the British colonialism. First published in 1780, this newspaper raised issues that included topics like rights of the poor, anti-colonial topics, and taboo topics as well. And since the beginning, English literature in India has come a long way. This literature was not restricted to any specific forms or era, but has evolved along with this beautiful nation. May it be the poetry of the early 1900s that captured the romantic spirit, or the poetry of Sarojini Naidu, which underscored the charm and splendor of the Indian traditional lifestyle and the Indian scenes during the freedom struggle. Novels like A Train to Pakistan by Khushwant Singh, depicting the social upheaval during the time of partition, and A Fine Balance expressing the turmoil in the times of the national emergency in the 1980s, and many more have been at the zenith of expressing the Indian emotion through times immemorial. Through this evolution, the English literature has become much more than just a medium of expression. It is now an effective instrument in the hands of those who can bring about societal change for the problems that persist in the modern era. I would like to thank once again to Dr. Dabir Madam for her inspiring words, and all the delegates present here for giving us their valuable time to share their knowledge. My best wishes to the organizing committee from Vasantrao Neg Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur, Rajkumar Keval Ramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, Dr. M.K. Umate College, Nagpur, and Bhivapur Mahavidyalaya, Bhivapur, for a successful organization of the event. I would especially like to thank all the writers for always being there to represent the people. I sincerely hope that all the attendees enrich themselves with the wisdom of the speakers of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Thanks for your kind words, support, and motivation. Not by wasting more time, would like to thank the chief guest of the inaugural session, Dr. Dabir Madam, president of this inaugural session, and director of our institute, Dr. Sujata Vyas Madam, convener, Dr. Kapil Singhel sir, Dr. Naik sir, Jubi George sir, and all the participants, contributors in this session. And we are going to have the first plenary session connected. So I hand over mic to my colleague, Dr. Govind Rathod. Over to you, Govind Rathod, sir.
Thank you, sir. A happy morning to one and all present here, respected chair, resource person for the session, all digital participants, and my dear colleagues. I, Govind Rathod, in the capacity of host for this session, welcome you all for the first plenary session of today's national webinar on depiction of India in English literature, organized by the Department of English, Vasantrao Naik Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur, in collaboration with Rajkumar Keval Ramani Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, Dr. M.K. Umate College, Nagpur, and Bhivapur Mahavidyalaya, Bhivapur. We are happy to have Dr. Aman Singh as a resource as a chairperson for the plenary session. It's my proud privilege and honor to introduce such a man of repute and versatile expertise. Sir has been serving as a professor and head at the Department of English, Government Autonomous PG Lead College, Chhindwara, Madhya Pradesh. He has teaching experience of 20 and 27 years at PG and UG level respectively. Sir has published 15 research papers at national level and 45 paper at international level. Sir's area of specialization include MP, higher education, train, motivate on personal development, communication skills, life management skills, self-empowerment training, and British fiction. Sir has served in the capacity of chairman of Board of Studies of English, Chhindwara University, Chhindwara, Madhya Pradesh. He has also served as a member of Board of Studies of English of Government Mahakaushal Autonomous PG College, Jabalpur, Madhya Pradesh. Sir is also PhD thesis examiner of various universities like RTMU University Nagpur, Gondwana University Gadchiroli, SPP University Pune, Sant Gadge Baba Amravati University Amravati, SRT University Nanded, Jivaji University Gwalior, Madhya Pradesh, Baraktullah University Bhopal, Vikram University Ujjain, Madhya Pradesh, Gondwana University Gadchiroli, Maharashtra, and CU Shah University, Gujarat. Sir has supervised 18 students for MPhil, and as many as 8 students have been enrolled under his supervision for PhD. Sir has been awarded with many good awards. The awards include Akshara Mitra Samman of MP Government of Literary Mission, Icon of Chhindwara District Award for Best Election Trainer under SVEEP Plan of Election Commission of India. He has delivered more than 1,500 motivational lectures during last 10 years. And that's a record. In addition to that, he's a trained NSS officer, and his special skills include his program organization skills and writing skills. Sir has been an expert trainer, and he has trained MP state level trainer of Election Commission of India. He also has trained, has been a trainer of MP government developmental schemes. In addition to that, Sir has completed minor project on Indian English drama. Sir is also a man of repute and great, intellectual horizon. I welcome Sir, for this webinar on Indian literature, on this webinar as a chief person, head person. Sorry. As the chairperson for the session. With the kind permission of the chairperson of the session, I take this opportunity to invite Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am, and let me take this opportunity to kind of introduce her in brief. Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am is presently a principal and head head of English at Renuka College, Besa, Nagpur. Her educational credentials include MA, LLB, DT, PhD on Jhumpalari, and honorary DLit by Inox International University with 30 years of teaching experience. Her areas of interest include Indian English fiction, Indian women writings, Indian diaspora, and technology in English teaching. She has to her credit variety publication, including 10 literary books, that is Views and Visions for Youth, Depiction of Women in Fiction of Jhumpalari, Kaleidoscope, Philosophical Perceptions, Vignettes of Indian English Literature, Indian Diaspora, A Sage of Cross-Cultural Currents, Nagpur City, Poet's Delight, Living Beyond Life, a collection of poems, critical essays on her higher education and ICT, ELT, and Indian English fiction, recent issues, Beneath and Beyond. And as many as 27 books with scholarly chapters. Recipient of Best Teacher Award 2009 and Best Paper Presenter at 6 international conferences, including ELT at International Conference 2015, Jaipur, Harso's International Conference on Religion, Literature and Culture in 2017, Pune. She has also presented more than 75 papers at national and international conferences, in addition to her creative writing. She is a poet at heart and has published as many as 50 poems and recited some of her poems at poetic meets in Nagpur and International Poetry Fest in Guntur. With the permission of the chair, I take this opportunity to invite Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am to connect with us on her discourse on Indian ethos as reflected in the works of British writers. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Govind Rathore, the Toastmaster of the first plenary session of the two-day national webinar on depiction of India in English literature. Good morning, everyone. Respected chief guest of the inaugural session and convener, Dr. Urmila Dabir, Honorable Chairperson and Patron, Dr. Sujata Vyas, Director of VNGIA SS, my principal friends and conveners, Dr. D.V. Naik and Dr. Joby George, Dr. Sanjay Palvekar, HOD PGTD English, RTMNU, a coordinator, Dr. Kapil Singhel, who made introductory remarks at the inaugural session, chairperson of this first plenary session, India in the works of British writers, Dr. Amar Singh, known for his oratory and acumen in literary academia. Other dignitaries, office bearers, and learned participants present virtually. I feel really pleased and privileged to address such an elite gathering of literary stalwarts and academicians. The topic in hand is really challenging, and I will try to do justice with whatever little I know about it. So let me share my PPT. Yeah, I hope it is visible. Is it visible? Please.
Yeah. That's
Yeah. I'll begin with Mark Twain, as Sujata Madam has also mentioned about Mark Twain's remark about India. India is the one land that all men desire to see, and having seen once by even a glimpse would not give the glimpse for all the shows of all the rest of the globe combined. He doesn't stop there, and he adds, as Madam has already mentioned, India is the cradle of human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most artistic materials in the history of man are treasured up in India only. So, with that little note, the topic of my lecture is Indian ethos as reflected in the works of British writers. India has been a focus of interest for the whole world since the ancient times. The Indian subcontinent was doing spice trade with the Roman Empire and the rest of the world. Even before Christopher Columbus started his search for India, in today's time, when the borders have blurred, the internet has produced netizens. More and more people are getting aware of India's rich heritage and culture, with so many tourists seizing the spiritual offerings of this ancient land. India is bound to be relevant for ages to come, and British were no exception to that. Today, I'm going to deliberate upon the changing world of English minds in India by examining the image of India in the writings of British authors. R.W. Lightbourne, in his write-up British Views of India, published in History Today, pens India. The East Indies hung before the eyes of 16th century merchants, soldiers, and adventurers as lands of riches and rarities, the home of pearls and spices, porcelain and silks, of powerful oriental princes, of strange idolatrous religions and rites, of elephants and monkeys, of palms and banyan trees. The interest that made these travelers come to India to study it and write about their observations shows how much the civilization of this country fascinated people beyond its borders. And the Belgium-born French poet and writer Henri Michaux memorably wrote in his book, A Barbarian in Asia, in India, there's nothing to see, everything to interpret. He saw deeper meaning in all that he found there. The controversial writer Neeraj C. Chaudhary, Bengali author and scholar and well-known writer as well, who wrote Autobiography of an Unknown Indian and A Passage to England, who opposed to the withdrawal of British colonial rule from the Indian subcontinent and quoted the Iranian scholar and traveler Al-Biruni critical comments on India and Hindus and says, outsiders, either in their praise or criticism, hold up another mirror before us, which helps us break our narcissism and offers us the chance to look at ourselves through others' eyes. Renowned Mexican poet Octavio Paz, the recipient of 1990 Nobel Prize for Literature, who is also known for the monkey grammarian, was also a diplomat, and soon after India's independence, Paz was posted in the city. In India, he met with the Bengali poets collectively known as the Hungry Generation, and even wrote a collection of poems from his days in India called A Tale of Two Gardens, just in the line of Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. India has always learnt about itself, known itself throughout its history from outsiders, more from outsiders. Records of two Chinese travelers, Farhan and Fan Zhang, helped Ambedkar fix the date of birth of untouchability. Upon learning of his posting in India, Paz writes in his book In Light of India, knowing that I was being sent to India consoled me a little. Rituals, temples, cities whose names evoked strange tales, motley and multicolored crowds, women with feline grace and dark and shining eyes, saints and beggars. He was attracted to know India more. Even the celebrated French author Dominique Lapierre went on to write the classic City of Joy, which is based on Kolkata, erstwhile Calcutta. The title stuck with the city and became synonymous with a culture that is hard to grasp. The story revolves around a Polish priest, a rickshaw puller, and an American doctor. Some of the major themes are poverty, religion, and class division, among other things. Lapierre speaks fluent Bengali. He also wrote Freedom at Midnight with Laurie Collins, a very celebrated book, and 5 Past Midnight in Bhopal, the epic story of the world's deadliest industrial disaster with Xavier Moreau, based on the 1984 Bhopal disaster in 2001. In the Himalayan journal, Joseph Dalton Hooker, J.D. Hooker, an avid British explorer, traveled the Himalayas in search of new ventures. Hooker recorded the early days of eastern India's Himalayan regions. Alongside Nepal, he traveled the Himalayas from 1847 to 1851. And during that time, he traveled by an elephant to Mirzapur and later took a boat to sail across the Ganges and reach Siliguri. He then took a pony up to the hills of Darjeeling. Hooker even wrote to Darwin, telling him all about his findings in India. Yeah, we have some well-known Indian writers too. Who talked about the British rule in India. Prominently, I'd mention here Shashi Tharoor's Inglorious Empire with the subtitle What the British Did to India, and Pandit Sundarlal's British Rule in India. The persecution of Indians and British imperial ambitions are described in detail. Indian ethos is based on Indian scripture, and when we talk about Indian ethos, we should know the Bhagavad Gita, which is a summation of the Vedanta that provides eternal knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Prasthanatraya, which also includes the Upanishads and Brahma Sutra. These are the three starting points for the Vedanta school of Hindu philosophy. The Upanishads are the philosophical religious text of Hinduism, also known as Sanatan Dharma, meaning eternal order or eternal path, which develops and explains the fundamental tenets of the religion. Of all Vedic literature, the Upanishads alone are widely known, and their central ideas are at the spiritual core of Hinduism. There are 4 Indo-Aryan Vedas. The Rig Veda contains hymns about the mythology. The Samaveda consists mainly of hymns about religious rituals. The Yajurveda contains instructions for religious rituals, and the Atharvaveda consists of spells against enemies, sorcerers, and diseases. Divinity of human beings is not merely a notion, but a truly, you can say, a true experience in India, which we can see in Indian life. Indian ethos lays special emphasis on values, be it human or ethical. The Indian culture varies like its vast geography. People speak in different languages, dress differently, follow different religions, eat different food, but are of the same temperament. So whether it is a joyous occasion or a moment of grief, people participate wholeheartedly, feeling the happiness or pain of others. Here is a small video clip narrating you about to know how India is multicolored society.
In India, more than 1.3 billion people living. India is a land of many cultural livings. Unity through diversity is the main attraction to India by many of the foreign countries. Like United States, India is also a federal union where almost all of its states carries different languages, different cultural identities. Indian civilization is very ancient. The Indus Valley civilization was one of the first civilizations on earth. The Vedic period was a time in Indian history when the Hindu religion and caste system began in India. Mughal Empire was the last and strongest Islamic empire in India. So because of this unity through diversity and different cultural identities only, India is known as a subcontinent within Asian continent. So here we see India in people with different clothing, people with different religions, people with different food habits, people with different celebrations, people living in different localities like urban, semi-urban, or rural. So this is how people carries or live in different localities. So India is also mainly classified into 4 major sections, 4 major parts. The one is North India. The major city in North India is New Delhi, and the Eastern India, the metropolitan city in Eastern India is Kolkata. Western India, Mumbai is the metropolitan city, represents Western India, and South India, Chennai represents South India as a metropolitan city.
Yeah. Now let us turn towards the literature of the British Empire. It is also pertinent here to talk about the literature of British Empire that falls mainly into 2 different camps that reflected the different opinions of the time. One camp thought that it was the empire's obligation to expand its borders to improve the quality of life in the world. The examples of this idea are Rudyard Kipling's poem The White Man's Burden and Chamberlain's True Conception of an Empire. The other camp thought that the empire's ideas of goal of improving the world was a facet to mask the exploitation of the empire's foreign citizens. Conrad's Heart of Darkness gives readers a very vivid picture of what is wrong with the imperialism. Hobson's imperialism is a study that also points out flaws with the imperial system, stating that the system is not improving the colonies' quality of life, but instead they're exploiting their wealth. With the end of Second World War, the British Empire was broken, the jewels from its imperial crown were gaining independence one country at a time. The writers of these colonies started to create their own works of literature in the English language. This was the most dramatic geographic shift of English literature in history. Some of these post-colonial writers are Ol Soyinka, a Nigerian writer, Nadine Gordimer, a South African writer, Derek Walcott, a St. Lucian poet and playwright, V.S. Naipaul, a British author of Indian origin, and J.M. Coetzee, a South African writer. All of them were winners of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now we'll talk about all the British writers here who won Nobel Prize for Literature. They are Rudyard Kipling in 1907, John Galsworthy in 1932, Bertrand Russell in 1950, Winston Churchill in 1953, William Golding in 1983, V.S. Naipaul in 2001, Harold Pinter in 2005, Doris Lessing in 2007, and Kazuo Ishiguro in 2017. So these were the British writers who won Nobel Prize. So here I'm going to talk about the British writers who are really interested in India and wrote about India and gave different facets of India. E.M. Forster between 1879 and 1970 in A Passage to India. Ruth Pravar Jawala from 1927 to 2013 in Heat and Rust. T.S. Eliot 1888 to 1865 in The Westland. Rudyard Kipling 1865 to 1963 in The White Man's Burden and Kim. John Masters 1914 to 1983 in Bhowani Junction. Mary Margaret Kai or Molly Kai 1908 to 2004 in Shadow of the Moon. V.S. Naipaul 1932 to 2018 in India, A Millennium Mutinies. Paul Scott 1920 to 1978 in The Jewel in the Crown, and Ruskin Bond 1934, who is still living in the Blue Umbrella, have given different shades of Indian ethos, mostly during the time of British India. Wherein here T.S. Eliot, who talked about Indian philosophy and spirituality in his Westland. Professor Gokhale pens the portraits of India sketched by Rudyard Kipling, E.M. Forster, and Paul Scott as three different periods of the British Raj by adding historical realism with the romantic idealism. In his India in the Eyes of the British, Three Views, Gokhale identifies the three authors: Rudyard Kipling with The Age of Confidence from 1860 to 1918, E.M. Forster with The Era of Anxiety 1919 to 1935, and Paul Scott with The Years of Sunset 1935 to 1947, the year of our independence. Novelist E.M. Forster's phenomenal work, A Passage to India, is probably the most important novel written in India by a foreign author. It definitely shows the cultural nuances of the country and puts them beside British colonialism. Needless to say that the author spent time in India. A Passage to India is unrivaled in English fiction in its presentation of the complex problems which were to be found in the relationships between the English and native people in India, and in its portrayal of the Indian scene in all its magic and all its wretchedness. E.M. Foster was nominated for the Nobel Prize more than 10 times in different years, but had never won. A Passage to India is based on Foster's experiences in India, deriving the title from Walt Whitman's 1870 poem, Passage to India in Leaves of Grass. Apparently, the title, Passage to India, may signify a journey to India, but as a matter of fact, there is more than that. It is a journey of the mind in search of new ventures, a journey of the soul to understand thoroughly that what India is. So here the poem goes, Passage to India, lo soul, seest thou not God's purpose from the first? The earth to be spanned, connected by network, the races, neighbors to marry and be given in marriage, the oceans to be crossed, the distant brought near, the land to be welded together. So Walt Whitman sees India as a mysterious and fabled place that once visited will allow rejuvenation of his soul. E.M. Foster's A Passage to India concerns the relations between the English and the native population of India during the colonial period in which Britain ruled India. The story revolves around four characters: Dr. Aziz, his British friend Mr. Fielding, Mrs. Moore, and Miss Adela Quested. These two English women, the young Miss Adela Quested and the elderly Mrs. Moore, travel to India, and Adela expects to become engaged to Mrs. Moore's son Ronnie, a British magistrate in the Indian city of Chandrapur. Adela and Mrs. Moore hope to see the real India during their visit and visited the fictitious place Malabar Caves. Adela thinks she finds herself alone with Dr. Aziz, and it is assumed that Dr. Aziz has attempted to assault her. Ajit's trial and its run-up and aftermath bring to a boil of common racial tensions and prejudices between Indians and the British who rule India. One of the most notable critics comes from Professor Edward Said, who referenced a passage to India in both his books, Culture and Imperialism and Orientalism. In his discussion about allusions to the British Empire in early 20th century novels, Said suggests that Foster departed from his views on colonizer and colonized relationships. He emphasized a more unknowable Orient rather than characterizing it with ancient wisdom and mystery. A Passage to India emerged at a time where portrayal of India as a savage, disorganized land which is in need of domination were more popular in mainstream European and British literature than romanticized depictions. Some post-colonial theorists like Marian Wasim Khan and Benita Parry have turned this novel a modern Orientalist text, which meaning actually that it portrays the Orient in an optimistic, positive light while simultaneously challenging and critiquing European culture and society. But I think it is not the case with E.M. Foster. Next is Ruth Kaur Bhazawala, who was a German-born British and American Booker Prize winning novelist, short story writer, and two-time Academy Award-winning screenwriter. After meeting Cyrus Dawala in England, she married him and moved to India in 1951. You will ask, because Dawala, we used to take her as Indian writer. Dawala began then to elaborate her experiences in India and wrote novels and tales on Indian subjects. She is the only person to have won both Booker Prize and an Oscar. Heat and Dust in 1975 won the Booker Prize to her, and the book was also ranked by The Telegraph in 2014 as one of the 10 all-time greatest Asian novels. Heat and Dust is set in India. The initial stages of the novel are told in the first person from the narrative voice of a woman who travels to India to find out more about her step grandmother, Olivia. We discover that Olivia is actually smothered by British social restrictions and longs for deliverance. She meets the Nawab, who instantly charms her and gradually lets her into his life. Olivia eventually becomes pregnant with the Nawab's baby and out of fear decides to abort the child. This causes scandal in the town of Satipur and she then resides in an unnamed town, Town X, for her remaining years. The novel ends with the present day narrator, whose name was not really mentioned, also becoming pregnant, deciding to spend her years in the town and raising her baby in the town and eventually being Okay. Yeah. Is it okay? Yeah. It's
Yes,
been
ma'am.
shared now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Should I go back? It's okay. Should I go back?
No, you can continue.
Yes.
Okay. So Kipling's book, it was Kim, which was really a successful novel. The book presents a vivid picture of India, its teeming population, religion, and superstitions, and the life of the bazaar and the road. Kim is shown as an orphan son of an Irish soldier, a poor Irish mother, who have both died in poverty, living a vagabond existence in India under British rule in the late 19th century. Kim earns his living by begging and running small errands on the streets of Lahore. As Victorian imperial poetry, the white man's burden thematically corresponds to Kipling's belief that British Empire was the Englishman's divine burden to reign God's empire on earth, and celebrates British colonialism as a mission of civilization that eventually would benefit the colonized natives. By and large, throughout the interlude of their Indian service to the crown, Britons lived as super bureaucrats or Pakka Sahib, remaining as aloof as possible from the native contamination in their private clubs and well guarded military cantonments. So that was the difference we can see, and which is reflected in the white man's burden. Yeah, this cartoon depicts a representation of Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, The White Man's Burden, originally published in 1899. The United States used this white man's burden as an argument for imperial control of the Philippines and Cuba on the basis of moral necessity. But Lobeschier wrote the brown man's burden as an opposition to Kipling's pro-imperialism stance. Now here I have two stanzas from the poem The White Man's Burden. The first stanza, which goes like this: take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness, on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. And then again I'll quote here the sixth stanza. It's a seven stanza poem. The first stanza is perhaps addressed to the colonizers, but the sixth stanza is addressed to the colonized. The refrain is take up the white man's burden. Yet dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to clove your weariness. By all I cry or whisper, by all I live or do, the sullen people is repeated. Okay, shall weigh your gods and you. So the seven stanza poem, and it's written beautifully, but the message was for the white man to be strong and to take the burden of the colored people. But Kipling wrote beautifully about Bombay. Here, these four lines: Mother of cities to me, for I was born in her gate, between the palms and the sea, where the world and steamers wait. So next is Lieutenant Colonel John Masters. He was a British novelist and regular officer of the Indian Army. Uh, yes, and Masters is principally known for his historical novels set in India, notably Bhuwani Junction, which was turned into a successful film. Bhuwani Junction is set amidst the turbulence of the British withdrawal from India. It is notably for its portrayal of the Anglo-Indian community who were caught in their loyalties between the departing British and the majority Indian population. The Anglo-Indian characters in the novel, like many members of their community, are closely involved with the Indian railway system. And it's the story about Victoria and Patrick Taylor, Anglo-Indians, and a Sikh Ranjit who helped Victoria to save her from detention at the backdrop of Indian independence in 1946-47. And Bhavani Junction was made into film twice, one in Hollywood and the other in Bollywood. Victoria is actually an Anglo-Indian, the daughter of a railwayman. Victoria had earlier decided to escape the claustrophobic atmosphere of the Anglo-Indian community by becoming a woman auxiliary corps officer. With the war ends and her return home was sure. However, she is confronted with the problem of her identity all over again. She decides, so it is not the identity crisis for the diaspora, it's the identity crisis for Anglo-Indian as well. She decides to get engaged to the gentle and serious Ranjit in an attempt to become assimilated in wider Indian society. But then she realizes that in such a marriage, uh, she would require to give up her name and essentially her identity. But in the end, she realizes that she cannot escape her origins, and rejecting both the Indian man and the British one, she chooses Patrick, an Anglo-Indian like herself. V.S. Naipaul's India Million Mutinies Now was published in 1990, and it presents the stories of people he met during his travel across India. It is about Indian way of life and a great piece of historical non-fiction depicting the nation during that time. India, a Million Mutinies Now is a travelogue written during the author's sojourn in his ancestral land of India. It was the third of Naipaul's acclaimed Indian trilogy, which also includes An Area of Darkness and India, a Wounded Civilization. Now, Naipaul expresses serious misgivings about Indian attitude and the Indian way of life. And you know him for his book, A House for Mr. Biswas. Mary Margaret Kai, or Molly Kai, is a British writer born in Shimla, British India. Her literary agent was Paul Scott, and who had been an army officer in India, and who would find fame as an author of his Raj Quarterly. It was with Scott's encouragement that Kai wrote her first historical epic of India, Shadow of the Moon, published in 1957, describing the political landscape in India in 1857, how the country came to be ruled by the British East India Company, and the factors leading to the rebellion. In the story, the heroine Winter is born in Lucknow to an English mother and Spanish father. Orphaned by the age of 6, Winter is sent to England to be raised by her great grandfather, the Earl of Ware. But the country of her birth still holds a special place in her heart, and she dreams of returning one day to the Gulag Mahal, the place she considers her home. Even Molly Kai had the same feeling, and she spent her most of the time in British India. As she said, it was part of my childhood because cousin house where we lived during the cold weather was no distance at all from the most famous of the 4 main gates into the old wall city of Delhi, the Kashmiri Gate. Next is Paul Scott. The Jewel in the Crown is the 1966 novel by Paul Scott that begins his Raj Quarterly. The 4-volume novel sequence of the Quarterly is set during the final days of the British Raj in India during Second World War. The novel focuses on the triangle again of an English woman, an Indian man, and a British police superintendent. Most of the stories actually go like this, setting up the events of subsequent novels in the series: The Jewel in the Crown, The Day of the Scorpion, The Towers of Silence, and Vision of the Spoils. And here I will just tell you what Gokhale has commented. Paul Scott's Raj Quarterly examines 4 kinds of social divisions and their associated conflicts. The first is race, explored through the rape of Daphne Manners. The second is class conflict within the British society in India. The third is conflict between the generation with regards to independence, explored through the characters of the Latins and Qasim families. And at last is the violent conflict between Hindus and Muslims antecedent to partition. And last but not the least, Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond is actually an Indian author, but he has a British descent. That's why I have incorporated him here. In his first novel, The Room Off the Roof, the semi-autobiographical story of the orphan Anglo-Indian boy named Rusty. He has written Vagrants in the Valley in 1956 as a sequel to The Room Off the Roof. He has written The Blue Umbrella with Funny Side Up, A Flight of Pigeons, and many more, 50 books for children. In The Blue Umbrella, the young Benya falls in love with the gorgeous blue umbrella owned by a Japanese tourist. She manages to exchange her bear claw necklace for it, and her acquisition enthralls everyone in the village, particularly the old shopkeeper Ram Bharosa, who becomes obsessed with owning it. And overcome by envy and longing for that object, Khatri cannot eat or sleep. He offers to buy the umbrella, but initially she refuses to sell. But Ruskin Bond ultimately concluded, but an umbrella isn't everything. Binya sacrifices her umbrella for the happiness of Ram Bharosa, and this in turn makes him a more pleasant and friendly person. A simple act of kindness can indeed transform lives. So this aspect of life was highlighted. And before I conclude, I will talk about Ruskin's contribution here. In 1978, Bollywood film Junoon is based on Bond's historical novel A Flight of Pigeons about an episode during the Indian Rebellion in 1857. And in 2005, the Bollywood director Vishal Bharadwaj made a film based on his popular novel for children, The Blue Umbrella. The movie won the National Award for Best Children's Film, and Ruskin Bond made his maiden big screen appearance with a cameo in Vishal Bharadwaj's film Saat Khoon Maaf in 2011, which is based on his short story Susanna's Seven Husbands. And thus, the changing inner worlds of the British writers in India have been examined and assessed by different images of India in the fictional and non-fictional writings of the prominent writers of the time. Shashi Tharoor is right when he says India has been born and reborn scores of times, and it will be reborn again. India is forever, and India is forever being made. So with that, I conclude. Thank you for your attentive listening. Yes. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for touching upon the various aspects of Indian life by giving the examples of British writers, those who are globally famous for bagging the Nobel Prizes in different streams of thought, and the kind of contribution they have made to the world, and the kind of writing the kind of writing they developed upon the narratives of Indian life. It has rightly been captured in your discourse on the said topic. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your deliberation. It was really an informative and insightful session. With this, I take this opportunity to invite Dr. Aman Singh, sir, who is the chairperson for the session, to enlighten us with his expert inputs and comments. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jyoti Patil, for enlightening us on the topic what British writers and foreign writers have contributed India in the eyes of foreign writers. And thank you again, all the organizers, for giving me this very opportunity. Ma'am has very well shown light on different authors. Age of India. India, with all its magic and wonders and its wretchedness also. T.S. Eliot's Wasteland also depicts the Hindu philosophy, the Buddhism that is prevalent in the name of religion and ideological mythological guidance. Ma'am has referred V.S. Naipaul, Ruskin Bond, John Master, Mary Margaret, Paul Scott, especially Walt Whitman's poem Passage to India in his epical work Leaves of Grass. Edward Said quoted on this very poem in his book Culture and Imperialism, stressed on the unknowable parts of India. Ruth Pravar Jhabala in his book Heat and Dust has described Indianness in its greatest form in one of his novels. Kipling's King also depicts white man's burden. Madam has referred V.S. Naipaul's Area of Darkness, House for Mr. Vishwas, a famous book. Sasi Tharoor's India has been born and reborn and establishing itself in many forms. Truly, ma'am, you have depicted the British Empire and their eyes on India. I would like to add something. What Britishers contributed positively and negatively for Indian literature. Deep relationship between British and India during the British Empire. Anglo-Indian literature means the British who write about India. Indians started writing in English also as a medium of creative exploration in Indian English literature. The theme of backwardness, terrible poverty, exploitation, corruption have been dealt in details. With the advent of globalization, a new class of Indians emerged that has also got description in British literature. Settlement of Indian English writers abroad, that is called diasporic literature, has theme of homeland, dislocation, displacement, a feeling of loss, alienation, cultural identity. Depiction of India in all its aspects, modern and traditional, emotional actions, politics, and economic unity and diversity that unite India as a nation. Indian ethos refers to volumes, to the values and practices that the culture of India contributes to the world literature. These values are rooted in Sanatan Dharma, the eternal essence of Indian classics. Ethos is a discipline that examines one's morality. Ethos, Indian ethos defines a culture, a people, and even a country. Indian ethos have always focused on Lok Kalyan, or the good of the society. The substance of Vedic literature is for the message Bahujan Hitay, Bahujan Sukhay, that can be translated as for the common good. The purpose of human life, as enshrined in the Upanishads, was good for all. The world is one family. Even Hindi poet Kabir says, "Sai itna dijiye jame kutum samaye, main bhi bhukha na rahun, sadhu na bhukha jaye." These has been our cultural values. Oh God, give me that much so that I can take care of my family. I do not remain hungry, nor the person who comes to me for alms. Indian cultural values are Paramarth values, the good of others in Indian ethos. Even R.W. Emerson has depicted Indian values. The American transcendentalist, essayist, and poet in his poem Brahma writes about Brahman. Brahma is pure being without attributes, forms, unclassifiable, unknowable, the everywhere breather who breathes without breath. William Butler Yeats also adds something about William Butler Yeats, he discusses three Indian who influenced W.B. Yeats, the Irish poet and dramatist, very much on Upanishadic philosophy. They were the Theosophist Mohini Mohan Chatterjee, Rabindranath Tagore, and Swami Purohit, who found place in Yeats' anthologies. Through these poets, Yeats entered the realm of Hindu philosophy, Upanishads, and the other sacred texts of India. Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, Meru, and Mohini Chatterjee speak a lot about love in moksha, liberation, release from the changing world, and cycle of birth and rebirth. All speak Hindu religious myths symbolically. T.S. Eliot, as Ma'am Patil has discussed, T.S. Eliot also dealt Indian influences, both Hindu and Buddhist, are scattered everywhere in the works of British American born writers, poet, critic, and dramatist T.S. Eliot. The use of three Shantis, Shantis are peace blessings that close the wasteland and has the impact of Upanishads. The gods, the reference of the gods, anti-gods, and the man refer to gods for the victims of gods were the victims of arrogance. Anti-gods were advised to be more compassionate towards humanity, and men are asked to be giving. Men are asked to be giving because they tend to become victims of selfishness. Eliot turns the sequence into datta means give, dayadvam means to be compassionate, and damayata to be self-controlled. Walt Whitman, madam, has thrown enough light on. Walt Whitman, an American poet, was much influenced by Indian religious thought. He advocates the abolition of slavery. He advocates women's rights, free love, and technological developments. Ma'am has also referred Rudyard Kipling's famous book, Kim. It is a story of an Irish vagabond orphan who is taken up by the British Secret Service. It weaves together Buddhism and espionage. There is another book by William Dalrymple, White Mughals. The author, it was published in 2003. The author tells us an irresistible, saddest story of James Kirkpatrick, the British resident in Hyderabad, and enchanted Khair-un-Nisa. There is another book, Up the Country, by Emily Eden. It was published in 1867. Emily Eden, sister of George Auckland, the worst Governor General. She travels across northern India and gives a vivid commentary of Indian life and ethos. Another book, A Matter of Honor, by Philip Mason, that was published in 1974. How did a few thousand British troops hold down a subcontinent of 200 million people is the basic theme in this very book. Another interesting book by George Franklin Atkinson, Curry and Rice. It was published in 1860. It is a story of innocent young subaltern the disillusioned old major with his Indian family, with many pack of hounds they hunt. And there is a beautiful description given in this very book of Indianness. The Great Mutiny of Christopher Hibbert, it was published in 1978. The Great Mutiny was a traumatic event. The European officers were cut down by their own men and whose loyalty they had trusted in, and women and children were butchered mercilessly. This has been depicted in this very book. Another book, The Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell, it was published in 1973, is an episode of mutiny and massacre. Man-Eaters of Kumaun by Jim Corbett is a story of man-eating leopards in the hills of northern India. A Passage to India, as Madam has referred, by E.M. Forster. Of course, is the British are absurd and don't understand India. That is the delineated message of this very book. The British should understand India in different perspectives also. Staying On is another book by Paul Scott. It was published in 1977. It's a book full of joy and makes an elegiac farewell to the British Raj. In the end, I would like to quote that India is not an ordinary country. The discovery of India by Pandit Nehru and the wonder that was India by A.L. Basham also depicts India in its fullness and in a different perspective. Basham depicts in this very book the wonder that was India. This book proves very beneficial to understand Indian culture. India is a fascinating country, so it is also a fascinating book on India. India's past with much reverence, creative curiosity, and sincere relish. It is a critique on India's ancient and powerful civilization, journey of humanity towards excellence and higher levels of existence have been discussed in this very book. Both Pandit Nehru and A.L. Basham, the British writer, both were inspired by cultural heritage of India. Basham, a historian and Indologist, feels deep affection for India, Indian culture. He has depicted India from Indus Valley civilization to pre-Muslim era. Basham has discussed India when it was Sone ki chidiya, the golden bird. Truly, our country, our culture has been defined in our Vedas and religious scriptures. Ayam nijah parobet gadna laguchet sam udar charitanantu vasudhaiv kutumkam. The whole world is our family. Veer bhogya vasundhara, apadivo bhav, apadipo bhav. That is the message of Indian culture, Indian scriptures. India, the Gita and as Madam has referred Gita also. The Gita and Ganga Jal ki dhar. India is a land of Gita and Ganga Jal ki dharti. Truly, Indian culture is made up of Krishna's divine voice. Yada idai dharmasya gilanir bhavati bharat abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srajameyam paritranam sadhunam vinashaya chatuskartam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yugo ide karmadiyeva adhikaraste ma phales padachan. Another quote in our religious scripture: Shraddhavat labdhe jnanam mam ekam saram braj. Charity, truly Indian culture delineates charity is a virtue of the heart and not of the hands. Indian people, Indian culture defines Mata Bhumi Putro Aham Prithibhya. Our motherland is our mother, and we are the worthy and divine sons and daughters of our country. Nanam, the message of our Gita, Nanam Chiddanti Sastrani Nanam Dehati Papke, Nanam Kiledanti Apo. This is the message about the mysteries of birth, death. In our Hindi poetry also, जिसको न निज तथा निज देश का अभिमान है, वह नर नहीं नर पशु निरा है और मृतक समान है। निज भाषा उन्नति है, सब उन्नति को मूल, बिन निज भाषा ज्ञान के मिटे नहीं को शूल। So these were the things. In the end, I would like to conclude my analytical discussion on madams. Madam has tried to delineate Indian values which have been depicted in in foreign writers' works. Perhaps Madam wanted to say, I would like to quote Pandit Atal Bihari's speech on Indian culture, what India is, what Indians are, and Indianness. With this very word, I quote, भारत कोई भूमि का टुकड़ा भर नहीं है, भारत कोई भूमि का टुकड़ा भर नहीं है, ये जीता जागता राष्ट्र पुरुष है, यह जीता जागता राष्ट्र पुरुष है, ये बंधन की धरती है, अभिनंदन की धरती है, ये बंधन की धरती है, ये अभिनंदन की धरती है, ये अर्पण की धरती है, ये तर्पण की धरती है, ये अर्पण की धरती है, ये तर्पण की धरती है, इसकी नदी नदी हमारी गंगा है, इसकी नदी नदी हमारी गंगा है, और कंकड़ कंकड़ शंकर है, और कंकड़ कंकड़ शंकर है। हम जिएंगे तो भारत के लिए, हम जिएंगे तो भारत के लिए, और मरेंगे तो भारत के लिए। और मरने के बाद भी गंगा जल में बहती हुई कोई हमारी अस्थियों को सुनेगा, और मरने के बाद भी गंगा जल में बहती हुई अगर हमारी अस्थियों की आवाज को कोई सुनेगा, तो एक ही आवाज आएगी, तो एक ही आवाज आएगी, भारत माता की जय, भारत माता की जय। Thank you, Jyoti Patil ma'am, for your brilliant and beautiful delivery. We all stand and divinely enlightened. Really, it was commendable. You have summarized the whole Indianness through that is depicted in the British writers' works. Thank you all the organizers for giving me this very opportunity. Especially thanks to Kapil Singhel ji. He is in the center of this very webinar. Thanks a lot, all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir, for your apt insight and expert comments. If there are any questions, it is now open for the question and answer session. If not, we can proceed further. There seems to be no question. Thank you again, Dr. Amar Singh sir and Dr. Jyoti ma'am for sparing your valuable time and enlightening us on this occasion. I would also like to place on record my heartfelt thanks to all the participants who are present here on this digital platform. With this, I hand over the reins of the proceedings to Dr. Vinita Virigindam.
Thank you, Govind. I hope my voice is audible to all of you. Thank you, Govind, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Amar Singh, for your wonderful comments. And thank you, Dr. Jyoti Patil, ma'am, for that wonderful erudite address on the topic of today's national webinar. And as of now, respecting everybody's valuable time, I won't take much time to introduce our guest for today for the second plenary session of the two-day national webinar. We have with us Dr. Indira Nithyanandam and Dr. Madhavi Nikam Madam. Dr. Madhavi Nikam Madam as a chairperson for the second plenary session. And it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce her to all the scholars who have joined us live on this digital platform today. A warm greeting from me and from all the organizers and all my counterparts sitting across all away from each other. Okay, so please, I request all your attention and a request to please do not switch on your video and audio while the address of the experts is going on. It's a humble request to all of you. Thank you. And we have with us Dr. Madhavi Nikam ma'am as a chairperson for the second plenary session. Dr. Madhvi Nikam ma'am is Associate Professor at the PG Department of English, R.K. Talreja College, Ulhasnagar, Thane, Mumbai. She's a recognized research guide for PhD in English, University of Mumbai, and 9 of her students have been successfully awarded with PhD degrees. Apart from being a member of the Senate of the University of Mumbai from 2010 to 2015, she has been actively involved into academics and administration. And currently, she is a member of Academic Council, which began, I hope, in 2017 and which will last till 2022 of the University of Mumbai. And she represents the teaching fraternity. Dr. Madhvi Nikam was editor of 2 international journals, Literary Insight and Contemporary Discourse. Her contribution to research continues as a secretary of her Higher Education and Research Society, Navi Mumbai. She has organized many international and national conferences and seminars till date. Her work has been recognized with awards and accolades, and she has published many research articles at national and international levels. We welcome you, Madhvi Nikam ma'am, and it's a pleasure having you on board as a chairperson.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. You're most welcome. And with your permission, ma'am, I now take this honor to introduce our expert resource person, Dr. Indira Nityanandam.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Her topic is something which is very captivating, and I'm really honored to be introducing her to all of you today. The topic suggests India's of 150 years, a peek into Indian writing in English. And Dr. Indira Nityanandam, madam, she retired as a principal of Srimati S.R. Mehta Arts College, Ahmedabad. She's a director of Bharatiya Bhasha Sanskriti Sansthan Gujarat Vidyapeeth and is a visiting faculty at IIM Ahmedabad and at EDI Gandhinagar. She engages PG lectures at the SAP Center, Gujarat University, and at St. Xavier's College, Ahmedabad. With more than 4 decades of teaching experience, she has written and presented papers at national and international conferences. She guides MPhil students and is a supervisor to PhD scholars at Gujarat Judicial Academy and advisor at Gujarat State Textbook Board and the CN Angrezi Kendra. She is a member of the board on the Board of Studies of St. Xavier's Autonomous College, a trustee at Chaitanya School, Gandhinagar. She is a chairperson of VTG at the NGO Visamo. She has published 6 books and edited 8, and is an associate editor of the literary journal Gnosis. Her latest achievement is Altitudinous, a novel penned by 10 authors. Recently, she added another feather to her cap with the publication of Translation Studies, Approaches and Practice, edited by her and Dr. Saket Banerjee. And she has also edited a book on Amitav Ghosh. Often invited to deliver keynote addresses, to chair sessions at seminars and conferences, as a resource person and at faculty development programs, as well as orientation and refresher courses at KCG. She says that teaching is still a passion and her first love. Her main areas of interest include translation studies, ELT, Indian writing in English, and Dalit literature, believing that translations between Indian languages have to play a major role in bridging the increasing linguistic chasm in a multilingual country. She began by translating Tamil poetry into Gujarati with the Sahitya Academy grant for the same. Having translated and published a collection of Tamil Dalit short stories into Gujarati, she is now translating a Tamil Dalit novel into Gujarati. Translating Narayan Desai's Gandhi Katha has been one of her fulfilling and meaningful translations. It's such a wonderful and it's a pleasurable moment for me to just introduce to all our participants here, ma'am. And with that, I request all the esteemed scholars who have joined us on Zoom and YouTube Live to give all ears to Dr. Indira Nityanandam and help us in welcoming her for her exclusive and disquisition speech today. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
The platform is all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinita. Am I audible? Audible
Yes,
and
ma'am.
visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vinita. Yes, and thank you, Dr. Kapil, for inviting me. He reached out to me on behalf of the organizers. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And as I said, teaching is my first love. I can't say only love, my family will murder me, but certainly my first love. And it's always a pleasure to be talking, lecturing, sharing ideas, conversing, even in this new normal times when physical distance has become such an important necessity all over the world. So I'm very happy to be here, and Dr. Vinita gave you a very long introduction about me. If you looked at the topic, you must have wondered for a moment, is that a grammatical error? Is it a typo? What do you mean by India's? Right? In fact, with Dr. Kapil, I think more than once we discussed why there should be an India's. So I want to begin by talking about why I've called it India's. I belong to a generation, I'm 70, so I have 2-3 generations after me, and English. And we spoke of literature, but today we speak of Englishes and we speak of literatures. So now what was once considered to be singular is now so much in the plural also. I guess that applies to India too. If you look at the Indian writing in English, and if I have to describe the India that you see in Indian writing in English, maybe I should do about this concept of Indian writing in English. Some of you might remember that in the earliest years of Indian writing in English, we referred to it as Anglo-Indian literature. And then there were critics who pointed out that we have a group of people in India, a class of people, if you please, who we call the Anglo-Indians. And I'm talking about even before independence. So the Anglo-Indians were, if you remember, people born of mixed parentage. One parent was British and one parent was Indian. And we call them Anglo-Indians. So they said then this literature could be we said it won't do. We changed it to what we called, from Anglo-Indian, it became Indo-Anglian, right? It became Indo-Anglian, and yet people were not happy. And then we talked of Indian writing, Indian English writing, etc., etc. Till I think this is probably about 25, 30 years old when we decided on Indian writing in English, and in more often referred to as IWE, Indian writing in English. I'm saying all that because I want to begin about talking about the beginnings of Indian writing in English. And where do we begin? And why did this kind of writing begin? Remember, all of us, either as students or as teachers or as critics, we all go back to Macaulay's Minutes, which I'm not going to talk about, and how the concept of Indians learning English began for various reasons, even if the British decided they want to make clerks of us, which they didn't succeed very much in. So the Indian educated, the English educated Indian, to put it correctly, began to look at English literature, and that class actually began writing, writing in English. They were probably also already writers in other Indian languages, maybe or maybe not. As I begin talking about the writers, I'll draw your attention to that. But I want to here begin talking about the accepted first English novel, fiction writing. First English novel written by an Indian. Some of you have probably heard of it, some of you have not, but permit me to begin talking about that. The book was called, the novel, Raj Mohan's Wife. And probably, if you haven't heard of it, you might be shocked to know that the writer was, I repeat, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. And what do we know Bankim Chandra Chatterjee for? We know him for Vande Mataram, right? And here was this person who began by writing. His first writing was in English, and it was a work of fiction, which was called Raj Mohan's Wife. It was doomed to failure for a number of reasons, and the most important reason is this. Written around 1860s or around that period, all the good people were whites and all the bad people were browns. Not Rajmohan's wife herself, but considering the days in which it was written, wife is only referred to as Rajmohan's wife, so she had a full name. All the good people were white and all the bad people were brown. You know, we don't like to call ourselves blacks, but browns. Who would read it? The Indians didn't like to read it because they said, why should we read a book where we are shown in a bad light? The British weren't interested in reading a work of fiction by an Indian writer. So the book was a total flop. Maybe good for us, because later on, this is the same writer who gave us books like Anandamani. Anyway, that's another story. So when I go back to Indian writing in English, I go back to Rajmohan's wife. I go back to the 1860s. I'm talking of the period when we took baby steps in writing in English. Permit me to admit here that to try and give you a picture of all the India, permit me to admit here that to try and give you a picture of all the Indias that has been portrayed in Indian writing in English is certainly an impossible task. I'm not a great athlete, but in this lecture, I shall only be taking long jumps and high jumps and sprints and whatever, because otherwise I cannot begin in the 1850s and bring you to the 2020s. There are going to be lots of things that I'm going to talk about, but then probably there are going to be more things I'm going to miss out. And in each one of your minds would rise the question, but why not this author? Why not that author? You know, it's like an anthology of poems. If somebody were to write the best poems of the 1950s, will make a selection, it would be different from somebody else who would try to make a selection. So in the same way, I'm going to talk about what I think are who I think are the important contributors to Indian writing in English. So permit me to do that. I hope, Dr. Kapil, I'm okay, my speed, my audibility, my visibility. If you could just raise your thumb to say it's okay, I'd like to continue, because I'm always scared of what technology is doing to my voice or to my ideas. Dr. Kapil or anybody, Dr. Vinita, if somebody could just show me a thumbs up to say that everything is fine. With or without it, I will continue. Thank you, Dr. Vinita. Thank you so much. So I'm going to begin with the 1860s, 1870s, where all of us know that the beginnings in Indian poetry in English began with the Dutt sisters, Toru Dutt, Aru Dutt, the brother Abu Dutt, etc. Now they were Bengali. And remember that when we think of the Renaissance, the 1850s, 60s, 70s, when we think of the social Renaissance in India, we do go to Bengal because one important name that comes to mind is Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about the Renaissance. But at that time, there were in Bengal English educated. Not only English educated, there were people who had lived in Europe. The Dutt family, for example, the father felt that Europe was a better place to live for the health of his kids. And so they all shifted. They lived in Paris for some time. In fact, we even have a poem written in the French fields about the French fields. And then the family shifted to UK. Sadly, the weather in England did not suit the Dutts, and they came back. And unfortunately for us and for them, they all died very young. So the first group of writers that I'm going to be telling you about, the India that we see in them, I'd like to begin by talking about Toru Dutt. Taruvaru, etc., Derozio, Michael Madhusudan, many other names of the period will come to you. What was the India that you see in, say, in the poetry of Toruta, T-O-R-U, Toruta? Some of us might have read her poem, Casuarina Tree, maybe. Maybe some of us have read her poem, The Lotus. Maybe some of us have read the poem, Sita. So she was trying in her poetry, and they are short poems, she was trying to give a picture of the India that she saw, that she knew. A lot of it, for example, if you think of the poem Sita, it's about Sita, the mythological character from Ramayana. If you think about the lotus is so much an Indian flower, right? Like the daisies or the daffodils of UK. So she talks about the flower, the lotus, which she considers as the best flower. There was a competition and then the lotus wins. And then she talks about the casuarina tree. I had to look up, the first time I read the poem, I had to look up the dictionary, because the casuarina tree is not something that you and I generally talk about. When we think of the trees that we see in India, to my mind, the neem tree will probably come first, because I live in a city. So I don't really see banyan trees or, peepal trees. I see few of them. I certainly do see a neem tree, for example, or the gulmohar or the cassia, okay, whatever. But she talks about the casuarina tree. So the India that she is trying to represent here, my dear friends, I want to say, is an India, she thinks, which the non-Indians will be able to appreciate, understand, empathize with, if you please. So she's trying to project an India. And this is the early writings that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the 1860s, I'm talking about the 1870s, 80s, because as I told you, they all died in their 20s. So this India is being described in a language which is very much the language of the Romantic age. So if you do a quick think back of when did the Romantic age begin, etc., etc., in 1798, and these people are writing about 60 years ago, the language is very much the language of the Romantic age. The language is very much, the descriptions very much descriptions of Keats, maybe not Wordsworth, because there's no pantheism, there's no philosophy in these poems. Because I began talking about poetry, I'd like to continue. And I'd like to go on to say Aurobindo, for example, a little later, but certainly. And when you and I think of Aurobindo, the first book that comes to our mind is Savitri. Not many of us can claim that we have read the entire Savitri, but we know what it all is about. We know the political and the spiritual India that Aurobindo is describing here. Because when we think of Aurobindo, we also think of the spiritual Aurobindo, we also think of Mother, we think of Aurobindo, and we think of Pondicherry, etc., etc. So when we think of the India that one sees in the writings of a great poet like Aurobindo, not so much appreciated today, not so much prescribed today, because he's a little difficult, and we've sort of put him aside today. But the India that we see there is a very spiritual India. What does it show? What does it give to the readers? And here we are assuming that there are non-Indian readers also. So we are projecting an India, or Aurobindo is projecting an India, of which he was proud, and proud we should be. And it is the spiritual India that we think about. When we think of Aurobindo, we can't help but immediately think of Rabindranath Tagore. Call him Gurudev, as many of us are fond of calling him, call him Tagore. He is and was an important voice of Indian writing in English. With Tagore, we are treading on a little difficult ground, because what is it that he wrote in Bengali? And then it was translated into English. What was it that he wrote in Bengali and himself translated into English? And what was it that he wrote in English itself? And when I'm talking about Indian writing in English, should I really talk about translations? No, these are questions that will come to our mind. So let me, for the moment, restrict myself to talking only about Gitanjali, which got him the Nobel Prize. Okay, that's another part of the story. But I'm talking about Gitanjali because we know his short stories, we know his novels, we know his plays. We also know Tagore as a painter. Those of us who are interested in music know of his Rabindra Sangeet, which is so much a part of Bengali culture to this day. We know all that. But for this topic that I'm going to be talking about, which is just Indian writing in English and the Indias there, so let me restrict myself, a very difficult job. Let me restrict myself only to the Gitanjali, because we know that Tagore himself translated into Gitanjali. Gitanjali is a beautiful collection of songs, poems, if you please, which combine within them spiritual India, political India, romantic India, and much, religious India, and much more. So the India that comes through the poems of Tagore in Gitanjali gives us a great picture of the variety, of the diversity that we call India. That is India. And remember, all this time we are talking about pre-independence India, right? So we are still talking about that. So then politically, if you look at it, there might be questions. What was India, the Indian subcontinent? Do we have to go up to Myanmar and whatever, right? So we're not looking at all that. India is an image that we carry in our minds. And it is that India that I am talking about. Tagore, in his other writings, has a lot of rural Bengal also. Now, the writers that I have mentioned, the Dutts, for example, or even Chatterjee and all, most of the time they lived in urban India. And therefore, what they described in their writings is more about middle class, to some extent maybe upper class, urban India. But in Tagore's writings, and here I'm not talking about Gitanjali, but I'm talking about this variety of his writings, you do have also rural Bengal. We have rural Bengal because Tagore's father, you know, he came from a rich family. There were zamindars also, he had land. So he has gone and lived in parts of rural Bengal. And rural Bengal is beautiful, right? I have not, when you fly into Calcutta, the amount of greenery that you see is amazing. And also I love pukur. For those of you who are familiar with Bengal or Bengali, pukurs are small ponds. And all around Calcutta, and even in the city of crowded Calcutta, you have these pukurs, these small ponds, which are covered with lotuses. I've not seen so many lotuses in any other part of our country as I've seen in Bengal. And I think it's probably a favorite with Kali. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure because I don't want someone to say no or yes or whatever, but I imagine because the amount of, the number of lotuses that are offered in temples in Calcutta, I've not seen it anyway. Anyway, so we're talking about the rural Bengal that we see in Tagore's writings. And at this point, I would just like to make a reference to a novel of Tagore. He didn't write it in English, but I can't help mentioning it. A novel which was called Ghore Baire, In the House and Home, translated into English, The Home and the World, because this is where you see the political India. You see India as Bharat Mata. You try to find the Bharat Mata in the woman character, in the protagonist of the novel. I'm just mentioning it this by the way, but that is the kind of India that you see in Tagore's writings. I'm still in the early part of the 20th century, and I've got 100 more years to cover. I shall try and do it to the best of my ability, as I said, with a number of long jumps and high jumps and sprints and whatever you have. So let me get my breath back and come to a period which most of us are very familiar with. This is the 1930s. We are still in pre-independent India. But anyone who talks about Indian writing in English will have to talk about the Trinity. We'll have to talk about Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao and R.K. Narayan. We call them the Trinity. We put them together, but all of us know that they are as different as chalk and cheese. There's almost nothing in common about their writing, about their portrayal of the India in which they live, except probably that they wrote at the same period. Probably they wrote in English, and that they were great fiction writers. Other than that, there's really nothing common about them. So let me begin with the first name in the Trinity, Mulk Raj Anand. And even if I talk only about one or two books of his, even if I talk only about The Untouchable and The Coolie, the India that he portrays in them, the India of the poor, the India of the low caste, the India of the untouchable, the India of the laborer, the India of the have-nots. This is the India that Mulk Raj Anand describes, and I've just taken two books as examples. You can look at many more books and say that he describes that also. But for any of us who begin reading Mulk Raj Anand, or if your student asks you, which book should I begin with? I think all of us will immediately mention Untouchable. And then the question comes to my mind, can only a Dalit write a Dalit book? I would say when I read this book, here is somebody who is able to understand the condition of the untouchable and his portrayal of a class to which he did not belong. Because remember, he was booted and suited like Mahatma Gandhi was. He went to Sabarmati, met Mahatma Gandhi and changed his apparel like Gandhi did after a meeting in Chennai. But so what is the India that he portrays? What I just mentioned, the poor, the untouchable, the have-nots, the laborers, etc., etc. The class divide, the caste divide, and much more. Nowhere in the novel, in Untouchable, as an example, do I get the feeling that he's portraying India in a bad light. No, to me, he's portraying the India that did exist and probably does still exist in some pockets of India. But so when we look at Mulk Raj Anand, when we look at the India that he's talking about, it is this India. If I immediately jump to Raja Rao and say, what does he talk about? In a lot of his novels, he talks about the clash of cultures. He talks about Indian culture and he talks about Western culture. He talks about how they come into conflict with each other. He talks about the period in India when we were still hoping to become independent, when we were still fighting for independence, when Gandhi was still a hero, when weaving, when the charkha, khadi were great symbols. He talks about all that and much more. In a novel like Cat in Shakespeare, he does something very different. In Kantapura, he does something very different. So Raja Rao is a difficult reader, but when you do read him, you do get glimpses of India that he saw or that he wanted us to see. The third writer in this trinity is, of course, R.K. Narayan. So much more easier to read, so much more a greater favorite maybe with youngsters because he's so easy to read. Happily for us, for many of us, his Malgudi Days was quite a popular hit on Doordarshan when it was made into a serial. And for many of us, Devanand and Wahida Rahman probably brought R.K. Narayan alive. What is the India that R.K. Narayan describes for us? The India of the average middle class, living in small towns, cities, or villages, it doesn't matter. The financial expert or the English teacher or so many others, the vendor of sweets, I could go on and on. You know, he wrote so many novels. But to many of us, maybe R.K. Narayan, as I just mentioned, also is the author of the guide. And the guide takes us, right? A guide becoming a godman and all that goes with it. And you have Rosie and you have Marco. So you have Indian dance, you have Indian snake drama because Rosie is very good with the snake dance. You have ancient India probably because Marco is interested in archaeology and therefore he goes into the caves. You have also in this novel, for example, you have this guide for various reasons. I mean, I'm not going to go into the entire story, but you know how he's made into a godman. Godmanship is thrust upon him. So you also have blind faith, you have blind belief. So if you do read one novel of R.K. Narayan, maybe a lot of images of what India he was portraying will come to us. When we look at these writers, we also have to remember that along with their works of fiction, they also wrote short stories. So many of their short stories are quite popular. And in fact, many of our novelists all over the world begin with short stories and then move on into fiction. Right? I've already reached the 1930s, but I would be a little unfair to a woman writer, women writers, if you please, but to a woman writer. And I would like to here mention Ruqaiya Shekhawat Hussain, whose book was written, Sultana's Dream, was written in 1905, right? So much before the Trinity. But because I have to give some sort of connecting links to my lecture, I've brought her in a little later because I would like to talk about other women writers. So this lady, she wrote a book called Sultana's Dream. And in a way, we could even call it science fiction. We could call it fantasy, because this book deals with a place called Ladyland. Amazing. 1905, here is a Bengali Muslim woman. I'm saying Muslim because probably she was in Parda, or most women in her family were in Parda, and she was in Bengal. And she writes this book called Sultana's Dream, where she has Ladyland. So this is an utopia of some kind, where she's talking about what would happen if men were forced into Parda and women were free. So this is what happens in Ladyland. Of course, the women need help. And where do they get their help from? They get their help from technology. It's a wonderful book. I mean, it's fantasy, but that is the kind of India he portrays there. Because I began talking, and the reason why I kept her for a little later, even though I've come to 1930, because having started talking about Sultana's Dream and Ruqaiya Shekhawat, I would like to go on to a few more women writers who wrote 1940s, 1950s, and some of the names that come to my mind right now. The first name I will take is Kamla Markandeya. She was born in 1925 and died in 2008. So she probably started writing in the 50s when she was 25, 30. Because she wrote a lot, her novels portray the India which was grappling with the process of urbanization, right? When we think of English fiction, or when we think of romantic poetry, or when we think of it as early as Goldsmith, we are talking about even Thomas Gray, for example, Country Churchyard. So when we're thinking of that, we're thinking of what industrialization did to England and how it spoiled the beautiful rural landscape. Here we are much later, but we are talking about, Kamla Markandeya she talks about urbanization, she talks about poverty, she talks about the gender conflict in India, she talks about the desire for an Indian identity, she talks about the effects of colonialism. So the India that we see here is an India that is now getting more and more urbanized, and the problems that come with it. Around the same time, we had another writer called Ruth Flower Jhabvala. She was not an Indian, right? Because she was German, British, American. She was not Indian. But she married an Indian architect, and she lived in India for about 25 years of her life. And therefore, she wrote a lot of fiction which was based in India. And she tried to depict India as seen by somebody who is not an Indian, but who lives in India. Dr. Jyoti Patil has already talked a lot about the Indian ethos in British writers. But here, we are putting her in the Indian writer group. And I'm talking about the Indias that we see in IWE, because she lived in India for about 24 years, 20 odd years. And a lot of it is what she saw. And therefore, in in a very, very easy way, she even talks about what she considers to be the lost souls. So these are Indians who are grappling with their desire to have an identity of their own and not succeeding because of the colonial pressure. So that is the India that she portrays. So what have I done? I brought you to the 1930s, 1940s. And as I keep mentioning again and again, it's a constant athletic battle. And therefore, I'd probably take a high jump, no, a long jump maybe. And I would now like to talk about a few poets again. And the poets that I'm going to talk about are as varied as you can imagine, as diverse as India is. Because one poet who presents India, and a beautiful India to my mind, she was half political also, but we refer to her as the Nightingale of India. And I'm talking about Sarojini Naidu. What is the India that comes alive in the poems of Sarojini Naidu? Can I talk about palanquin bearers? Lightly, oh lightly we carry her along. Like beads, like tears, right? The lightest of things. So that is the Indian bride being carried after the Vidai, going to her in-laws' house probably. Or can we talk about the bangle sellers of Hyderabad, where the beautiful market comes alive, and India, a colorful India, with colored bangles for each age, for each occasion, the pink, the green, the blue. So when you think of India, and when if I've not been to India, I think, and I want to think of the Indian markets, there's so much of color that comes to my mind. So here was this, I would call, beautiful lyrical poet, because any of Sarojini's poems can even be sung, can even be put to music. It's so beautiful. But the India that she shows to us is also a beautiful India. Of course, there are other kinds of poems, but as I mentioned right at the beginning, I can't deal with all of it. So I'm just trying to try to remove what I think is most significant about the writing. I'm talking about Sarojini Naidu. And then immediately I go across to the opposite side of the pendulum, if you please, and I'm talking about Kamala Das. What does Kamala Das portray? All of us have read her poems. She's been accused of various things, but when I think of Kamala Das, I think the poems are to a great extent, to a very, very great extent, about the existential angst that she felt, and probably many, many Indians who are grappling with a number of problems. Indian women who were trying to be free, who were trying to have their voice, their space, their identity, etc. That is what Kamala Das brings to us. Simultaneously, I will have to mention, if only in passing, a poet, a Jewish poet like Nissim Ezekiel, who told us, I didn't choose English, but English chose me. Just think of a poem like Ganga, or think of a poem like Guru. Think of so many of his poems. One of my favorites is Farewell Party to Pushpa T.S., to Miss Pushpa T.S. Beautifully written in Indian English, and so many other of his poems. Bombay, so many of his poems, right? He presents an India, basically Mumbai, because that's where he lived for a number of years. He also tried drama, if you remember, but we remember him as a poet, as a Jewish poet. And I'm calling him a Jewish poet because he himself talked about how he often wondered whether he belonged and where he belonged to. And that's why I refer to him as a Jewish poet. I'm a little partial to a poet I want to mention now. Not very well known, but there's something which I remember about what he told us. He was my teacher, and therefore I'm slightly partial to him. You can look him up on Google or wherever. The poet that I'm referring to is Dr. Shiv Kumar. He's not a very great poet, but you might find him in some anthologies. And I remember his telling us once that when you write poetry in English, you are an Indian writing in English. But remember, English is only the tool, and your similes and metaphors don't have to be English, don't have to be British. And therefore, if your heroine has long hair, You don't have to say her hair is as long as the Mississippi. Say that her hair is long as the Ganga or the Brahmaputra or the Jamuna, or whatever you please. I'm mentioning him here because the India that was portrayed by the poets that I'm now going to mention is very much an India that we know, the India that we know, if that is possible. And here I would have poets like Mahapatra, Orissa, how the beach comes, or Puri comes, Konark comes alive in a lot of Mahapatra poems. I'll be thinking of R. Parthasarathy, the river, if you remember, the river in Madurai, etc. Was it he who wrote Two Cousins on a Swing? I'm not sure. Or was it A.K. Ramanujan? So, and then A.K. Ramanujan also. A.K. Ramanujan is very important for us as a writer because remember, he lived in the US, he taught at American universities. But he was so proud of ancient India, the culture, and he did a lot of translation of Tamil poetry into English also. So we have A.K. Ramanujan also, we have to remember the India that he presented for us. Very quickly, I have another maybe 10 minutes. Who will answer that question for me? Dr. Vinita, do you have another 10 minutes? It's 11:48.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, all right. So I would very quickly want to mention, again, a kind of trinity of the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And I'm thinking of writers now like Shashi Deshpande. I'm thinking of Anita Desai. I'm thinking of maybe Bharti Mukherjee, who later became diasporic because she shifted to Canada and the US. But let me talk about Shashi Deshpande and Anita Desai. When we talked about Kamala Markandeya, and we talked about the India that she portrayed, and we talked about the clash of cultures, we talked about Europeans coming to India. But by the time Anita Desai started writing, and if we were talking about the clash of cultures, we are going to talk about Indians who went abroad. One important book that one could think of is Bye Bye Blackbird. The India that Anita Desai portrays for us is very, very urban. They are lost souls. If you just look at a book like Cry the Peacock, by that time, the women were trying to have a voice of their own and not succeeding very much. Think about Clear Light of Day. And of course, she continues writing. So we have a lot of her works. And maybe along with that, we could even think of Kiran Desai. But I would like to talk about Shashi Deshpande and the kind of India that she portrays. Shashi Deshpande, time and again, in interview after interview, has said, I'm not a feminist. I know women, I know the world of women, and therefore my characters are basically women. That's what she says. And any book of Shashi Deshpande that I pick up, I can see this. What do I see? I see upper middle class, convent educated Indian women trying to understand their life, trying to create a space for them. They are not feminists in the sense of bra-burning, male-hating feminists, not at all. The India that she portrays consists of people who have the internal strength, if you please, to be able to overcome the hurdles, the difficulties, and create their own space. If you haven't read Shashi Deshpande, you could begin with one of her earliest books, which is Dark Holes No Terrors, or That Great Silence, and she's still writing. Some of her later books are absolutely fantastic, the way her women grow. So the India that Shashi Deshpande portrays is the India that many of us living in the 21st century are aware of. No, there are also in these novels, maybe women of the lower economic strata, for example. You could have a servant, a female servant, but the protagonists are always, they're either doctors or they are writers, or so we see an India which is growing, an India which has women who are probably stronger. Probably, I use the word. I have not talked about drama. Honestly, because for a long, long time, Indian writing in English did not have much drama. Yes, Tagore wrote drama. I mentioned Nissim Ezekiel. We have Karim Boy, we have other writers. And then when we think of drama, we think of Badal Sarkar and we think of Tendulkar. But remember, they did not write in English. So when we think of drama, maybe we'll have to begin as late as Girish Karnad. He also wrote in Kannada. But we have the advantage that he translated his own plays into English. So in a sense, maybe we can look, as I looked at Gitanjali. But I think one important name that we must look at when we are trying to see the India that is portrayed is probably Mahesh Dattani. Mahesh Dattani, still writing with his own play troupe in Bangalore, the kind of writing that he does, the India that he portrays is a very, very different India. Because here is an India which is bold. He has the ability to touch on taboo topics and write about them. So whether it's gay, whether it's eunuchs, and much more, we see that. So India is different in Mahesh Dattani's plays. It is not sugar-coated. The India that he projects for us, that he paints for us, shows, that he portrays, is a more honest opinion of what India is today. As I told you, I didn't spend much time on drama because there hasn't been much drama. If I come to the 21st century, or maybe the last part of the 20th century and the beginnings of the 21st century, I just want to mention two writers who I just love. And the first writer is Amitav Ghosh. You might immediately say, but man, his books are not based in India. I agree with you. A number of his books are not based in India, but many of his books are also based in India. So whether it's The Sea of Poppies or go to his earliest books, they are all based in Calcutta Chromosome, which I don't much like. But Shadow Lines, for example, is one of my favorites of Ghosh. And we must read Ghosh because Ghosh portrays a great deal of the India that we see today, that exists today, whether it's ecological problems, whether it's societal problems, and he writes in a very easy style. I would be unfair if I did not mention Arundhati Roy, if I did not mention the book which made headlines about 25 years ago, if I did not mention The God of Small Things. And I did ask you when I was talking about Mulk Raj Anand, do you have to be a Dalit to write about Dalit experience? I would say certainly not. Because the Veluta, if you have read the novel, the Veluta that Arundhati Roy creates for us in The God of Small Things, I think is one of the greatest portrayal of the Dalit experience in India, which continues to be true even today, as I mentioned. Every day the newspaper has some atrocity. Living in urban India, maybe we don't see it. Maybe we wouldn't like to see it, but it is still alive and kicking in many parts of our country, especially in smaller towns and the rural area. Very quickly, within the next 2-3 minutes, let me also say that when I think of the India that is portrayed, I should look at diasporic writing. I should look at feminist writers. I should look at Dalit writers. I should look at writers like Kanish Tripathi and Banker and etc. and Devdutt Patnaik, etc., who are reimagining India, who are rewriting India, who are giving us humanizing, if I can say, humanizing of the divine. I think we have to look at all that also when we talk about Indian writing in English, when we try and understand the Indias that is portrayed to us. My dear friends, thank you very much for your patient listening. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me. But I must say, as we say in Gujarati, tipe tipe sarovar bhare. It's with little drops of water that even the sarovar, the lake or the pond, gets filled. So I have only tried to put a few drops into your understanding, into your appreciation, into your knowledge of the Indias that has been portrayed in Indian writing and English over the last 150 years. Thank you very much, Dr. Vinita, and I hand over the mic to you.
Thank you, Dr. Indira Nityananda, madam. Thank you so much. May I pitch in Dr. Madhvi Nikam, ma'am? We need your permission. Can we take up questions first,
Yes, sir.
or
Please,
do I request you to give
please.
your exclusive and erudite insights into Madam's disquisition? What would
Sure.
be the best way that we can handle
Yeah,
it?
let the question answers take place. Then I would give my.
Ma'am, I just scrolled through the YouTube, but I don't find any questions as of now.
Okay.
Probably while you take on the stage, we might receive a few questions.
Maybe.
I think we'll wait for those
Hopefully.
questions. Meanwhile, I would request you to give us your insights into this wonderful tapestry,
Sure.
with conviction that Nithyanandan Madam has given
Yeah,
us.
sure.
Yeah, please, ma'am.
Yeah. Very, I think it's good morning still, 3 minutes still left for 12. So, Vasantrao Naik Government Institute of Arts, Science Arts and Social Science, Nagpur, has organized this online webinar, two-day webinar on depiction of India in English literature. At the outset, let me thank the organizers as well as the patrons, the director of Vasantrao Naik Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur, Dr. Sunetra Mahajan ma'am, Principal Dr. Urmila Dabir madam, Principal Dr. Divi Naik sir, Kapil Singhal sir, Dr. Somnath Barure, the anchor Rathore sir, and my dear friends, and Amar Singh sir, who was with us, Jyoti Patil madam, who was with us earlier, and all the scholars who have joined us through this digital webinar. So at the outset, let me first congratulate Indira Nithyanandan madam for a wonderful and a well-organized chronicle description of the Indian English literature and the Indias of the 150 years. I must really appreciate madam for the way she has been very, very particular about even pronouncing the word Indias, because there was a question raised, as she mentioned, that why Indias? And she has given justification to why she has written the word Indias and not only India. As very correctly that she has pointed out, the three generations that she has seen, she has experienced, and the plural that goes on with this word India, she has really done a justice to it through the chronological history, a chronological review of literature that she has done for us. Not standing much between what she has said and what I would like to add to it, let me just highlight some of the very, very important things that she has mentioned. I feel Madam has done a wonderful job by taking us back to history, taking us back to the writers who really laid a foundation for all the research scholars to make it grand, to make it very rich, to have a heritage with us today. She began with Raj Mohan's wife by referring to Raj Mohan's wife, and not only referring to Raj Mohan's wife as the first work by Bankim Chandra, but I feel the way she has laid down the entire, the journey of Indian literature and the images of India as reflected in Indian literature is really to be it's really very thought provoking. Madam referred to Indian poetry. She referred to Toru Dutt and Aru Dutt. Now referred like after Toru Dutt and Aru Dutt and the Indian poetry that she speculated upon. She spoke about the mythology. She spoke about the Bengali culture. She reflected upon various aspects of the nature that was there into Indian English literature as reflected in the poems of Toru Dutt. The importance of the flower lotus, how beautiful, how significant it is. And more than that, she also spoke about how the non-Indians were able to understand the culture of India, or maybe the nature, the environmental existence, or what you can say as the ecology of India through her poem. So a wonderful explanation was given by Madam over here, because it's not just the culture that is transmitted. One more question that Madam raised during her speech was, should we think about translation? I feel yes, we all must, because like Madam also knows, yes, it has to be. I'm just saying because translation is one medium through which Indian literature, Indian culture has reached abroad. Madam definitely spoke about diaspora. I will come to it, but then as Madam has explained, after Toru, that Madam spoke about Aurobindo's Savitri, wherein a different India, a religious, a very pious, a very sacred, a very spiritual India was reflected through the poems of Aurobindo. And it is not just an appreciation, rather, it is, I feel, a mirror to the culture of India. So, a very different India, as shown, as projected, as depicted by Aurobindo, was, put in front of all the scholars by Madam Nityanandam. Madam also went very, very swiftly and very aptly to Rabindranath Tagore. And without Tagore's Gitanjali, without referring to Gitanjali, I don't think so we can really move ahead, because Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali is a foundation where we can definitely have something very melodious, something very patriotic, something very romantic, something very spiritual. And I feel Tagore's Gitanjali has given us one such platform wherein, or one such medium of expression wherein we can definitely talk so much about India. The reflection or the image of India in the minds of non-Indians, or the image of India, those who are sitting abroad, also makes a difference because of such writings. So be it Michael Madhusudan Dutt, be it Rabindranath Tagore or Sri Aurobindo, these writers have immensely contributed to the image, the building image, or the image building of India, or rather I should call it the brand building of India. This branding of India became possible through the writings of such writers. The rural Bengal also was depicted beautifully by these great Indian writers that we have. Ma'am also mentioned about Khoreb, the Bengali work by Tagore, and Tagore's contribution cannot go unnoticed, because it is so vast, it is so Himalayan, that without referring to Tagore or Sri Aurobindo or Michael Madhusudan Dutt, I don't think so we can do justice to Indian English writing. One more very important aspect ma'am mentioned was about the term Indo-Anglian. So Indo-Anglian and Anglo-Indian. She very beautifully explained to us the difference between these two. Now, although some Indo-Anglian works may be classified under the genre of post-colonial literature, and then we classify it in a very different way these days, but then ma'am has done it very chronologically in a very simplified manner, wherein it reaches to each and every one in much more simplified pattern, I feel. Ma'am also went on to mention about the Trinity, a very well celebrated Trinity even today, Mulk Raj Anand, Raja Rao, and R.K. Narayan. I still remember certain writers, like even Bhavani Bhattacharya, apart from this Trinity, there are certain quotations, there are certain phrases, there are certain, you may say, sentences which are carved on our hearts and they'll always remain. Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable and his characters in Untouchable, like Bhaka, a very a character who reaches and who pierces the truth, the fact of India without giving a bad image of India, as Madam has rightly pointed out. It deals with the exploitation or maybe the low caste or the cultural clash, the East and the West. Again, then the Orientalist, we want to, if we want to talk about, like how the Orientalists look at Indians. Because in Untouchable, we have a character, a British character who actually helps out Bhaka. He gives a hockey stick to him. So how the Westerners look at India also is depicted. So viewing at Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable from the Orientalist point of view also has to be thought over. Madam has clearly mentioned in her talk about the East and the West and the cultural clash. I feel Mulk Raj Anand, be it Mulk Raj Anand or Bhavani Bhattacharya or Raja Rao or R.K. Narayan. Now, all these people have meticulously worked depicting the reality or the factual aspects in India, but nowhere have they gave a wrong or a bad image of India. They have projected the truth. but in a way which was acceptable to all of us to a greater extent. Now, ma'am mentioned about Raja Rao and R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan, as she has rightly pointed out, as madam has rightly pointed out, very, very simple, but very effective. Reaching to the middle class, to the core of the middle class, and moreover, I feel R.K. Narayan's work, or the work that he has given to us, it's very, very simple yet effective. As I have said, more than that, it appeals. It appeals to everyone, be it his short stories or his other works. So R.K. Narayan, his average middle class depiction is accepted universally today, because he has given to us a way to look at a different India, an ancient India, which we have accepted, not only accepted, but we are still living through it. The short stories of R.K. Narayan also ma'am has mentioned. Apart from that, madam has mentioned Sultana's Dream, and because she said she cannot do injustice to the women writers as such, and that's absolutely correct, I feel. So she then referred to Kamala Markandeya. Now, Kamala Markandeya, the grappling situation, or the urbanization and industrialization that we became a part of, and how this India became a new India, or how it started changing. This India that we have, the image of India that we have, the rural India, which was on the verge of urbanization, how it changed, how it came into existence, and how it started changing the cultural scenario as well. Okay, and even the dialectic part of it changed. So Kamala Markandeya, ma'am also referred to Rudpravar Jhabwala, because when we look at India, a different image of India that we have today is because of these writers who have projected India through a very non-Indian perspective as well. It is not just the Indian perspective that these writers have given to us. When an outsider, when an onlooker looks at it, how do they really perceive India to be? Do they perceive India to be what we really try to show? That is a question mark that we have to think about. But then madam has referred to Rudpravar Jhabwala. She also then later on swiftly moved ahead and went to poetry and the poets, and referred to Sarojini Naidu. Various colors and the cultural aspects that madam has referred of Bengal as well as India in all has to be really thought over. Because be it Kamala Das. Now Kamala Das has a great, as madam has rightly pointed out, the essence of existentialism. The essence of not only existentialism, but I feel the way she has created her own niche, the way she has proved that she is quite different, the boldness with which she wrote, and a different image, or I should here say a different Indian women that she projected, an outspoken, okay, a bold woman that she has projected through her writing. It was just a fight for existentialism, undoubtedly. But more than that, I feel it was to prove that yes, I feel always when it comes to gender discrimination, or when we speak about gender, issues, I feel gender has to be celebrated. It has to be celebrated. Be it a man or a woman, it has to be celebrated. We are what we are. We are unique, and that's why we celebrate it. And this is what exactly Kamala Das tried to do. Though it was not acceptable in the initial stages, later gradually it was accepted. So ma'am has given us reference of Nissim Ezekiel and Parthasarthi. Now, like apart from all these writers and these poets, ma'am also mentioned about A.K. Ramanujan. A.K. Ramanujan is really very close to my heart as well, because the way A.K. Ramanujan wrote about India, Indian rivers, Indian culture, Indian temples, Indian women, Indian men, I don't think so anybody could do it. Sitting abroad, he has done all this, because India, nobody can remove India from their hearts. India is in everyone's heart. Once a person comes and visits India, I don't think so he or she ever will be able to remove India out of their heart, mind, and soul. And that is why A.K. Ramanujan's poem appealed to us so much. Ma'am, I would like to also thank you for referring to Shashi Deshpande and the very, very famous quote of Shashi Deshpande, because my research is on Shashi Deshpande. And very, very aptly, you mentioned that she continuously keeps on saying that I'm not a feminist. But her writings, when you go through it, as very, very aptly you mentioned here again, that she depicts a upper middle class women. Her protagonists are either writers, they are doctors, they are lecturers. And apart from that, when she tackles these issues that come on the domestic front, on the professional front, or maybe her personal clash that she goes through, the trauma that she goes through, all her characters depict an India and Indian women in it with a very different dimension. And that is why Shashi Deshpande, when she writes about these upper middle class women, she always have shown through her writing that each of her protagonists at the end of the novel try to carve a different place for them, a position for them, some sort of designation they do achieve, or some sort of success they do achieve. So a different India from a feminist perspective also falls in place, I feel, when we read Shashi Deshpande. So apart from Shashi Deshpande, Madam has very critically mentioned and observed the works of Anita Desai, Kiran Desai. She mentioned about Amitav Ghosh, Arundhati Roy. And I think very, very speculatively, Madam has also said that she cannot avoid talking about, she has to definitely talk about the diasporic or the feminist or the Dalit writings. But I feel in such a short span, it's not possible to do. I know, I agree with it. And that is why it was a wonderful journey from Dorozio, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, Toru Dutt, or maybe Ramesh Chandra Dutt, Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, and to Kamala Das and Eunice D'Souza, Nassim Ezekiel, you have mentioned. Many, many more writers we can definitely cover under this. I'm sure. Arundhati Roy, as you have said. I would like to just, before I just finish, I would just like to mention one thing over here. From the contemporary point of view, we have to now analyze India from Aravind Adiga's The White Tiger point of view. Okay, so if we do it from that perspective as well, because the present generation likes, as Madam has mentioned, maybe Devdutt Patnaik, if you go to again refer to what Jyoti Patil Madam has said, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishads. And if you have to really analyze India and the image of India, or as like India as reflected through literature, then we have to think about the very contemporary perspective. If we take, we have to think about Aravind Adiga's White Tiger and how he looks at India. There is so much to be worked upon. There is so much to be done. We can definitely include a lot, many things, but we all have, time-bound, commitments to follow, and that is why we cannot do justice to it all the time. But very modern expatriate poets also who are working. Unfortunately, we don't have Aka Shahid Ali with us, like at this moment. But then his collection of poems are wonderful. Then you have Sujata Bhatt, you have Richard Christa, or you have, Tabish Khair, who really have done a great job. There are many such writers whom we need to explore and see in what way do they represent India. I congratulate Madam for a wonderful, wonderful presentation that she has given. I also thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact with all the scholars and to, put my views in front. Thank you, Kapil Singhal sir, for all the coordination that you have done, to all the anchors and to everyone working behind the screen. And my special thanks to Dr. Vinita Veeragandham for that, for that introduction, for that generous introduction. Thank you so much.
My introduction of you is still not over, because as an anchor, I would like to convey all the messages that I have read on YouTube Live, and all the scholars across, those who have joined us, are full of appreciation to all the speakers in these two sessions, the first plenary and the second plenary session. And yes, Dr. Nikam ma'am, today, I think Dr. Indira Nityanandan ma'am, yourself, and Jyoti Patil ma'am, and all those women across, those who have joined us, I think we are celebrating genders today, because we have all our counterparts equally contributing to make it very successful.
True.
Madhavi Nikam ma'am, thank you so much. Can you join us live again on video? I think your video has stopped. Yeah. Thank you so much for that alluring. And one word which I could that captivated was Himalayan. Indira Nityanandan ma'am said that her guru asked if you're using use in Indian language, that is similes or metaphors, and that word Himalayan that you've used as a metaphor or a simile for comparison was really great. I think we brought it on the screen for all our viewers there. Thank you so much once again. And I have one question for Indira Madam on YouTube, which I would like to question you on behalf of Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni. And I'll just quote, absolutely amazing deliberation. Can you please throw light on some transcendental writers in India? This question is for Dr. Indira Nityanandan Madam. If you could please pacify her query.
Meenakshi, Dr. Meenakshi, transcendental. I mean, are you looking at the spiritual meaning of transcendence? And then we have to go into self-transcendence. I guess the earliest writer that would come to mind would be Aurobindo. But if I'm looking at somebody today, I think I'm a little stuck about who should I talk about, because the modern writers or the contemporary writers aren't really moving in that direction. And I don't want to talk about all these writers who are rewriting mythology as going into the concept of transcendence. So I'm sorry, if I look at Indian writing in English, I don't think any name would come to my mind. I would need to go somewhere else. For example, I have this book, Abdul Kalam's interview with, or Abdul Kalam and the head, I forget his name, the head of the Akshardham, the head of the Swaminarayan sect. So I think the book itself is called Transcendence, but I'm not sure if I'll put it in literature. I'm sorry, Meenakshi, I don't think I'll be able to give you a list of writers who today I could put in that category, because I am looking at transcendence as the spiritual meaning of the word transcendence. I'm not sure if there's another meaning you are associating. So Dr. Vinita, that's all that I can say. But I want to say one word about Madhavi. Dr. Madhavi, you did a wonderful job. And honestly, if Dr. Kapil can give me 10 hours, I can do all the writers that you mentioned, Madhavi. Certainly. Thank you, Madhavi. You did a wonderful job.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes, Madhavi, ma'am, you had something to say.
No, I just wanted to thank ma'am. I said it was my pleasure indeed to be here and to listen to her. It was really great.
It was such a really alluring and engaging conversation between the chairperson and the resource person, and it was really wonderful. One particular adjective that I would personally like to attribute to Dr. Indira Nityanandan ma'am: you are a literary athlete, I'll tell you, because you took us right from the journey began from a point and it went on and on and on. And yes, I hope someday the organizers again can give you 10 hours and all our students and all of us, we can refresh our minds with what we had learned in our PG and UG classes. And once again, we look at it from a just different perspective. So thank you so much, madam, on behalf of all the collaborating colleges, the participants, the research scholars, the conveners, the organizing secretaries, the organizing committee, our experts on the panel, all the resource person. I thank all of you, and I request you all to join us tomorrow sharp at 9:30 for the second day of two-day national webinar or conference. And this is Dr. Vinita Veeragandham signing off for today. From Bhivapur Mahavidyalaya, Bhivapur. Stay safe, stay home, take care of all your near and dear ones. Thank you so much.